That was the first bar that was really the bare leather culture, and I felt comfortable and I felt attractive and I felt like I was with my people.
So, I know I'm kind of stating the obvious when I say that coming out can be both thrilling, exciting, exhilarating, wonderful, but also kind of dangerous. And maybe dangerous isn't the right word. Let me tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then you can tell me if there's a more appropriate term. But I think there's something about that first rush of freedom. Like after you've told someone or some people, you get this feeling of being invincible. Like, oh my God, I can do this. I'm incredible. And then with that rush of endorphins or whatever is happening to your body, you can maybe be a little reckless, I guess. And on top of that, you can try and make up for lost time, right? You can be like, oh my God, there's all these things that I haven't done and I need to go and do. And sometimes you can do that without thinking about the consequences. Which is my long roundabout way of introducing this week's guest, the author Brad Shreve. Now, you might already know Brad because he is a bit of a serial podcaster. He hosts not one, not two, but 3 different shows, which are Going Hollywood, Queer We Are, and Queer Writers of Crime. And when Brad finally came out to himself in his 30s, when he was working in the travel industry, he was newly single after leaving his marriage, he kind of dove headfirst into queer life, just taking in everything, the good and the bad, and the really bad. We got up to talk about Faultline, which was a bar in Los Angeles, as well as that time in his life when he was exploring this person that he was going to become. Now, before we get into the conversation, a quick content warning. The episode touches on drug use, suicidal thoughts, and domestic violence. And so if you're not in the right headspace to listen to that, please do take care of yourself and come back when you're ready, or don't listen to this episode if it's going to be too triggering. Okay, I think that's enough from me. My name is Kay Anderson, and this is Lost Spaces, the show that is all about lost queer spaces and the memories that they've left behind. Why don't we get into it?
You know, I could go to West Hollywood and have a great time dancing, but I knew I wasn't going to fuck anybody.
Oh.
But I could go to the Faultline and know the odds are pretty good.
Okay. I'm writing that down. More follow-up questions. More fuckable at Faultline. Right. So you've just said that you came out late in life.
Mm-hmm.
How late is late?
I was married. I had a 2-year-old baby, and I was 35 years old.
Okay, all right, okay. So let's go back then. Was it that you always knew that you were queer and you pushed it down, or you had a moment where you were like, oh, hang on a minute, this doesn't work right for me?
You know, I had a revelation just recently. I knew, like most people, when I was 8, 9, 10, that I was eyeing guys differently in a way I wasn't supposed to, but I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew it was kind of shameful. So I knew early on, but I did play around with some girls in high school because it was something you were supposed to do, but I can't say I didn't have a good time. And me and my wife had an incredible sex life. And in fact, my therapist at the Gay and Lesbian Center, he met us and talked to me. He's like, I think you're one of the few truly bisexual people I've ever known. And I thought, no, I've never been bisexual. I'm because right now I can't even imagine it. You know, I'm gay as gay can be, but I look back now and I'm thinking maybe I was more fluid than I thought I was, because I certainly didn't find it distasteful. It was great. It felt good.
So what changed then?
The gay part of myself, the attraction to men, grew stronger and stronger. And as long as I thought it was sexual, I kind of felt like I could bury it a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I lived in Las Vegas at the time, and a friend of mine from Phoenix, who's gay, my wife took my daughter and went to Omaha, Nebraska, to visit her family at the exact same time that he happened to come to Las Vegas for a bowling tournament. And he took me around to bars. And that was when I realized this is more than sex. I was with my people, and I was really comfortable, and I had a really good time.
Are you able to unpack that anymore? What was it about them that made you realize they were your people?
I just felt so comfortable. I was able to speak openly, and they were talking openly. There was no shame. There was no editing themselves. Just were being.
Well, and so then after that and having that moment of being like, oh, there is something here and it's more than just sex, what happened?
I started going to the Gay and Lesbian Center in Las Vegas, which right now they have a beautiful center, but back then it was almost a shack of a house. But so they had very little funding. But one thing they did have was they got a grant and got a therapist on staff for a while. And I started going and talking to him. I met with him every week, and then he convinced me to join this men's group, which was huge, mostly older guys. And that was a big factor because most of these guys were 70s and 80s. And they talked a lot about having waited until their wives died before they came out. And I thought, well, that's sad. And I said, even worse, what happens if I'm married for 30 to 40 years and she then finds out? Maybe I need to come out sooner. So soon after, I came out to her. And then when I told my therapist, he's like, wow, I knew it was going to happen eventually. I never expected it to happen this soon and this abruptly.
How did it go?
Well, the first thing, when I told her, the first thing she said is, well, I guess we need to start working on the divorce. But she didn't say it in a mean way. And I tried to talk about the possibility of an open relationship, and she nixed that within a second. So she slept in the bedroom, and I slept on the couch. We actually had sex a couple of times after that. But she went with me, and in Las Vegas on National Coming Out Day, I've never seen this before. I don't know if they still do it. They actually had almost like a fair. It was almost like a pride event. But people were there with their families, with their kids. There were those bouncy houses, and it was a much more family kind of atmosphere. And she went with me and took our daughter. And what she said was, if we want her to love and respect who she is, we have to be an example for her. And that's why we're here. She's a pretty amazing person.
Wow. But so she kind of went into, I was going to say business mode. It's probably not right. But just a very practical person who was like...
She went into mom mode. She was incredible. She is an incredible mom. And that, once our daughter was born, that became her, I'm not going to say it became her life. It became the most important thing in her life. And every decision she made was, how will this affect her? And she said, I will never say anything bad about you in front of her. Our relationship is, it's terrible right now, and it has nothing to do with my coming out. It's other stuff. But, my daughter just recently said, Mom has never said a bad thing about you. Because I was talking about things that she's probably heard, and she said, Mom has never said a bad thing. I said, I have no doubt. I said, because she told me she wouldn't, and she's a woman of her word. It was a pretty amazing coming out period. It was harder coming out to my family than it was to her.
But what did it feel like for you after having come out to her?
Oh, it was freeing. It was exciting. It was dangerous. And by that, I mean the therapist I had at the Gay and Lesbian Center, they lost the grant at that point, and he worked in HIV/AIDS awareness program. I don't know what exactly it was, but that was his focus. And he said, be careful, because a lot of guys that come out that are married, it's like a kid in a candy store, and they go crazy, and they end up getting HIV. And that made sense to me, but it didn't matter. I just went nuts. I mean, I just was having sex as often as possible. And I will say it was never protected. How I am not HIV positive, I have no clue. Just pure luck. Pure luck.
But you just threw yourself in and you weren't thinking about precautions.
No. And the reason why is I was looking for comfort. I was looking for a connection. And if they wore a condom, that would have been a separation. I needed that. In a sad way, I needed somebody who really cared for me.
And that was how they showed they cared.
It was a little bit more than that. I mean, it wasn't long after the whole incident where I came up to my ex-wife that I was transferred from Las Vegas to a new office in California. And it was up towards Northern California. And I was online all the time. I was really going through a bad period. My boss, who was gay, said, you need to go to the baths. You really need to just get it out of your system. So I would get on the computer. I rented a house from the guy, and he lived there just part-time. And I would get on the computer and hook up. And as soon as we were done and he'd go home, I would do the same thing again. And then the same thing again. Because I was so sad and felt so empty because I just lost everything. I lost my wife. I lost the person in my life. I lost my daughter. As far as being with me at all times, I gave them everything. I said, you have the kid, take everything. You should have all that. So I was living in an apartment with pity furniture, which pity furniture is, when your friends, people give you furniture to help you furnish really quickly, and they don't give you the best stuff, I'll tell you that. So I was just feeling lost and trying to understand what I was going through, and I needed that connection with somebody. And so, I would get a trick to come over, and we'd have sex, and as soon as they'd leave, I felt this high, and as soon as they'd leave, I'd have this empty feeling again. So I would get online and get somebody else to come over. And actually back then, it wasn't just online. It was, you had the phone call thing where you left a message and said, this is Brad, and this is what I'm into. And then you had to call back periodically to see if somebody left a message saying, hey, that sounds good, let's hook up.
Oh, wow.
And
without even seeing what they looked like?
No, because there was no way to do it. You just kind of hope for the best.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, but it just was the only way there was. So, I would have 3 guys in a night, and my part-time roommate, the guy that owned the house, he was like, you are my hero. And he didn't realize how it was just because I felt so empty. I always say I had a hole to fill, both literally and figuratively.
Many holes to fill. So you said coming out to your family was less straightforward.
Yes.
What happened?
When I came out, I'd already moved to LA, and I was in a relationship with the DJ in LA. And I just said, this is another thing my ex-wife said. She said, I am not going to out you to your family. I'm going to let you do that on your time. So, she would see them and they're like, what happened? What happened? She had to dodge the issue. It was very uncomfortable for her.
Oh, so they knew you'd broken up, but they didn't know why.
Yeah. It just didn't work out. That's what we would say. And everybody's like, God, you guys seem really happy. So anyway, it reached a point where I just felt like it's time to tell them. So my dad was still alive, and I had 6 brothers and sisters. And I said, how am I going to do this? Because I don't want to tell one person and have it go through the grapevine. And I said, the only way around this is to send them letters. So I wrote a letter. I wrote kind of a form letter. It said the exact same thing, but then I would word it a little differently in parts to make it a little more personal. And I sent it to my dad. I sent it to my 6 brothers and sisters. And I didn't hear from any of them for a year or more. Not a peep. Not a peep. It would have been better if they called and said, "You're disgusting." But I didn't even get that.
Oh, wow.
Just silence.
Well, and up until then, were you in constant, regular contact with them, or?
Well, I come from a weird family that we aren't really good at staying in touch, but when we do get together, it blows my husband's mind, because he's like, "You don't talk very often, but then you guys get together and it's like you just saw each other yesterday." Mm-hmm. It's just kind of a strange thing with my family. My dad, that's the way his family was. They never stayed in touch, but same thing. Mm-hmm. It's not a diss on them. It's just we don't stay in touch. But yeah, I would talk to them semi-regularly. I wouldn't go a year without talking to anybody. And I certainly wouldn't have gone a year without talking to my dad.
So what was it like in that year, just like twiddling your thumbs? Were you like, maybe they didn't even get the letters?
No, I knew they got the letters. In fact, I sent a copy of the letter to my ex-wife, and I said, "Here is what I've sent out to everybody." And she did at one point say, "Your dad told me that it must have been hard for you to have been in the closet all that time." Because she went and visited him with my daughter. And he told her that, but he said nothing to me. I didn't sit and twiddle my thumbs. I just continued to party and have a good time. Though occasionally I'm like, damn, I haven't heard from anybody. So it's not something I obsessed over, but when I think about it, it definitely hurt.
Well, and so, like, at what point did you finally get in touch, or did they finally get in touch?
Well, I did hear through the grapevine, I don't know how I found out, that some of them were upset that I didn't wait till my dad died. Because my dad, he was born in the 20s. Because I was born when he and my mom were much older. He's very conservative. And they thought, you should have waited until my dad died. And actually, after I finally talked to them, one of them said, "Why didn't you do that?" But anyway, I think the only connection I had was my dad. My dad and I did actually become estranged. It had nothing to do with my being gay. I just called him and I basically just called him and said, "Hey, I'm going through a difficult time." It was when I was doing drugs and didn't have any money. And I just wanted to talk to him. And he's like, "I'm not sending you any money." I'm like, "I don't think I asked for money." And so I hung up and sent him an email that said, you apparently want to hear when everything's perfect. So I'll wait until everything's perfect and get in touch with you. And I didn't talk to him for years after that. But then he had cancer and was dying. And this was immediately after I broke up with my ex. And I was a mess, just a mess. So I flew back east, went and stayed with my sister, and then we drove down together to South Carolina, where my dad was, where he was in the hospital and eventually died. That was it.
Well, and so what were the rest of your siblings' responses?
It was immediately not an issue. It was really strange. Nobody, other than the one, I made a comment that I heard that some people were upset I didn't wait till Dad died, and one of my brothers said, "Don't worry about that. Just don't worry about that." So I only had the one conversation over dinner with somebody that said, "Why didn't you wait?" I'm like, "Because I am who I am. And, if he can't deal with it, I think you should have waited." Well, that's fine. You can think so. But it wasn't an antagonistic discussion. So it was like almost immediately welcoming. Once they kind of, I don't know if it was forced at the time. They're totally comfortable with it now. I don't know if it was forced or I don't know what it was. It was actually more of a concern that I was on drugs, because my dad told them to hide all the liquor, I think Brad's on drugs. They didn't know for a fact, but that was more of an issue than me being gay.
Okay, so before we talk about that, maybe we should talk about the Faultline, because that's what we're here to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Why Faultline? Why did you want to talk about that space in particular?
I was more likely to get laid and also more likely to just feel comfortable. I dated a couple guys that wanted to go to West Hollywood and dance, and I had great time. I loved to dance, so I had great time. Like I said, I knew, yeah, there may be a twink or somebody that was into bears that I might get attention from, but I knew that that was a maybe. I was just mainly there to dance and have a good time, and I knew that probably wouldn't be a whole lot of mingling, just because there wasn't as much of a connection. But I could go somewhere like Faultline and feel very comfortable, approachable, or I could approach other people. And I knew if I wanted to hook up, that was going to happen. And I felt much more at home.
So do you remember the first time you ever went there?
I do, actually. It was when I still lived up in Stockton, California, the one that's outside of San Francisco. And I drove down to, I think it was the first time I met my future partner. We never married. I don't think, and it wasn't even legal then. But it was the first time I met him. I came down for the weekend to meet him. We went to the Faultline, and
hang on, just back up a sec. So you came down to meet him. Does that mean that you'd been talking online?
Yes, we met on back when AOL had the chat rooms, which were very good. I missed them. I don't miss AOL. I thought it was a crap system, but their chat rooms were great, and that's how we met.
Do you remember your username? Do you remember his username? Fill in the details for me.
I do remember his username very well. He still uses it, so I'll just say it has bears in the title, and that he likes bears. Mine was, it changed over the years, so I'm not really sure what it was. I know actually one time it was perfectly blunt. It was like bottom bear or whatever. I'm very versatile today, but I was not in any way, shape, or form back then. So I don't know, it changed off and on. I don't remember what it was back then.
Okay. Do you remember the first conversations you had? Like what was the reason that you were like, yeah, I'm going to go drive across the country to go meet this guy?
Well, he approached me and started chatting because I was one of those guys, I don't want to talk to somebody at the other end of the country. I'm not looking to make friends. I'm not looking for it to have a pen pal. I'm looking to hook up. But he reached out, and I don't know what it was. I just started chatting with him, and then we started talking on the phone, and he had the sexiest damn voice I ever heard. And I'd never been to LA anyway. So I came down and actually stayed with him, and we went to these bars. I mean, actually, I can tell you the exact moment when I saw him. He was bartending, he was DJing at this kind of a dive bar in West Hollywood that's not there anymore. And I walked in the door, and I saw him at the booth. I'm like, oh my God. And he walked down and gave me a big hug and maybe a kiss. And then we left there after he was done. Either we left there after he was done or the next day we went to the Faultline. And even though I'd been to gay bars before, it was the first time that I was pretty much, I don't know, I hate to use the term because it sounds rather silly, but I was pretty much a free spirit. Like it was no holds barred. In fact, this is so rude, at the bar where I met him when he was DJing, this guy who I later found out was a good friend of his, who was totally into bears, and he was very hot. He came over and started groping me and everything, and I just totally got into it, while this guy actually came to meet was in the DJ booth watching it all. Why he continued to allow me to stay with him over the weekend, I don't mind. I don't know, because I look back at that. It didn't even seem like a terrible thing at that point. And I look back now and I'm like, God, that was really rude.
Maybe he liked it.
Maybe he did. I don't know. So when we went to the Faultline, it was the same thing. I felt very open. And in fact, they had a bartender who he always took his shirt off. He had an incredible body. And he had really big nipples. He had worked on getting them cut out. And I remember leaning over the bar and sucking on them. I mean, this was like something I had never done before. I was the guy that would go to the gay bar and like kind of sit in the corner and think, I don't feel very at place here. Other than the one incident with my friend.
Well, so what was it then? Like, was it you or was it the space itself that created that condition?
I think it was both. I think mostly it was the space. It was a space where I saw people being not the least bit reserved, dressed very sexually, and were very open, if that's what they were looking for, very open about it, no holds barred. And those that weren't out to hook up were casually just talking about anything and everything. There was just a comfort level. And it had helped that these weren't all, the stereotypical gay men, which I had a real challenge with in coming out. When I learned, that was my first introduction to the bear community, where, as I said, I could go to West Hollywood and nobody would really look at me, and I could go to a bar like that, and I was the belle of the ball.
Oh, so this is interesting. So you said that your username on AOL had some form of bear involved in it. So you were already aware of bear subculture and identified as a bear, but you'd never been in spaces where you were surrounded by other bears. I've said the word bear a lot.
That is correct. In Las Vegas, I would go to this bear bar. I don't think it's there anymore. But mainly I would go there and sit at the bar, and they had a video poker game. And I would play enough that if I won enough money to buy my drinks, I'd go home. But there was no real interaction with anybody. It wasn't a very friendly bar, in my opinion. And I had been to other bars. I remember going to Puerto Vallarta for a business trip and had a great time. But that was the first bar that was really the bear leather culture. And I felt comfortable, and I felt attractive, and I felt like I was with my people.
Magic. So what happened with the DJ after this?
Well, what happened? This is a pretty ugly story.
Oh, are you prepared? Do you want to talk about this? Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. What happened with the DJ was we started doing, we drank a lot. And in fact, we would have people over before we'd hit the bars, and everybody would do a bunch of shots, because that way you save money when you go to the bars, which was really silly because half the time we never had to pay for our drinks anyway. But we did a lot of coke, and then...
Okay, wait, hang on. So before you get into the coke, was it just instant relationship, off we go?
It was in a manipulative way.
Okay. He
was the first one to say, I love you. He was the first one that said, let's keep it to oral sex, and because anal is a little too personal. But at the same time, he was like, let's keep it distant. I'm talking about when we hook up with other people, he said.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I didn't make that clear. Yeah, if we hook up with other people, just keep it oral because anal is too personal. And he was the first one that said, I love you, but he was also distance at the same time. It was kind of this push and pull.
But after that first weekend when you came down to visit, were you both like, yeah, we need to make this work? Or was it more of a long distance thing for a while before you finally moved? Or
we connected right away. We didn't become monogamous right away. And it took a little bit before we said, okay, we're a couple. But it was soon after we said we became a couple that I moved down. And that's the funny thing is, I was tired of the company I worked with, and I saw a better opportunity with another company in Southern California near LA. And so I decided, LA's kind of fun. Let me take this position. There's good opportunity there. Well, he went around telling everybody that he was so excited because I was moving there to be with him. And that wasn't true. I saw him as a benefit of going there. But I am happy to say I've never picked up and uprooted my whole life to go be with somebody. I've known people that have done that, and it's worked out fine, but I couldn't imagine
Nothing
doing
wrong
it.
with that. It's fine to be impetuous and ridiculous.
I think being impetuous is great. I love adventure. But like I said, that wasn't what I moved there for. But once I was there, I was a little clingy. I thought we had more of a relationship than we did. But he also gave a lot of mixed signals. Like I would go up to his studio and we'd have dinner together every night. And he would go to the bar and I would go along, but he kind of felt like I was watching him. Like, he's going to the bar, I want to go to the bar. That's what I saw.
Okay.
And this was part of the game. Like, when he would go to the bar and DJ, there were multiple bars that he would go to, but one that he did regularly. Faultline was one of them. When he would go to the bar, I would stay and hang out at the bar. And at one point I said to him, I said, I don't think I need to be there all the time. Maybe I'll go somewhere else or just stay home. I don't need to be hanging. And he goes, no, I want you there. But then he would complain to people that I was always there making sure, making sure, I don't know, that he wasn't hooking up.
Even though you were in an open relationship anyway?
Yes.
Okay.
This is where we were very different. When I hook up, it's purely sexual. I don't even care what their name is. Now, if we make a connection, become friends, that's okay. But it's not I don't feel that's important. Like when I went to the Faultline and I looked at a guy and he looked at me, I knew right away whether I was getting laid or not. And that was fine. And we'd go either his place or my place, and either I knew his name or didn't. It didn't matter to me. He was a little more, he had to get to know them a little better.
Yeah.
So I think he thought it was that I was making sure that he wasn't going to have this relationship. And I will actually say in the beginning, I didn't want to have an open relationship. I said, you can go have fun if you want. I'm not doing that. So there was that. There was that in the beginning.
And you did say at the top of this conversation that you would never do that again.
Correct.
Because of the experience in this relationship, or just because it's just not a thing that you fancy?
It's the experience I had in both relationships that were open. Both of them were bad in different ways. And I will say from my experience, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm saying anything against people that have open relationships. I have friends that have had wonderful open relationships for years and years and years. But I also have seen what I consider more often, one of the people wants to have an open relationship and the other does not, but they go along with it because they don't want to lose their partner. And I saw that so much and it made me so sad. So based on having seen that and my personal experiences, I had no interest in an open relationship after that.
And so are you saying that within that pairing with the DJ, you were the one that went along with it?
I eventually did, yes. And he was so excited. He was telling everybody, Brad's finally opened up and he's getting into it. And the sad thing is, so much of our relationship was every night, he would be on his computer, I would be on my computer, we would be in the chat rooms trying to hook up with somebody. And we'd have this banter back and forth where we're kind of having fun. But I look back now and I'm like, God, that was all the time. And then when we go to the bars, it was very rare that we were there just to hang out and chat. We were always on the prowl. He was not as good at it as I was. I mean, he was a model. He was gorgeous. He was popular. Dumb as mud. I mean, just dumb as mud. But he was charming. He was charming. And people at the bar were like wanting him so badly. And he was really uncomfortable. He didn't feel... Whereas I never had a problem. So once I said, okay, let's have an open relationship, I dove into it.
But it wasn't for you.
In the long run, it wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm. But, okay, so sorry, I cut you off before. I had asked about, like, what had happened with your relationship and, like, the move to LA and everything. So you were saying that at that time you were doing lots of drugs?
Yeah, we started doing meth, and I very quickly became addicted to meth. And we started dealing. Now, we weren't making money off of it. What we were doing is we were buying it and then cutting it up. And naturally, like I think most people that deal drugs, we would weigh out, let's say somebody, won 6 ounces. I don't even remember how it was measured back then, but it's been so long. Let's say somebody won 6 ounces. Well, I would cut up 6 ounces very carefully and then scoop a little bit off of there. Nobody buys a bag and then weighs it. So I'd scoop a little bit off of everybody's, and so in the end, we never bought our drugs. That's really what it came down to. Maybe we'd make a little money to go to the bar with, but it's not like we were major drug dealers trying to get rich. Part of it was wanting to make connections and make our friends happy and make ourselves popular. And part of it was financial. We don't have to pay for them. And we had a drug dealer that was like so incredibly with customer service. It was amazing. So I started doing it all the time, and it was affecting my work. He became abusive. I really, look back now, and he was psychologically abusive almost from the beginning. And it got worse and worse. And then it became physical.
Oh, shit.
It really shows what a low point in my life was, because back when I worked in the corporate environment and as an executive, there were times I had to take employees to a shelter because I mostly had women that worked for me. Their husbands were abusive, and I would take them to the shelter. And every time I'd think, why did they stay? No, it wasn't judgmental. It was just confusion. Like, why would they stay? And then here I end up in the same situation. And I kept thinking, I can make it better. I can make it better. I can make it better. Would that have been going on had I not been doing all that meth? I don't know. I will say that my life was going downhill very fast, and I felt it. So I did feel like he was a safety net.
Yeah.
So I think, was it the second or third time I called the police on him? It just got worse and worse. And I became so obsessive with trying to save our relationship. And so I'd go to the Faultline and I'd talk to everybody there about what can I do to save this relationship. And everybody's like, good God, get over it, you know? And they knew what was going on at home. And occasionally somebody's like, you need to get out of there. But mostly they just ignored it, which was kind of hurtful when I look back now. And we went to Palm Springs to a bar, and he got angry with me. And there were some guys that he thought were really popular, the in crowd. He got angry with me, and out in front of the bar, he had me on the ground and was kicking me. He was much stronger than me, kicking the hell out of me. And these guys all watched it. So when we got in the car to go home, he's like, do you see what you made me do? Which is typical of somebody that's abusive.
Yeah.
And the whole thing of, you know, he'd abuse me and then he'd comfort me. And I always wanted more from the relationship. I wanted to be married. And he didn't want that. But again, that was part of those mixed signals in the beginning where it seemed like he is the one that really wanted something.
Yeah.
So it was just a really sick relationship. Really sick. And at that point, because of the drugs and because of his abuse, my job performance at where I worked was going downhill fast. And I was warned that, you know, you're on thin ice here. And it wasn't getting any better. And then 9/11 hit. This tells you how long ago this was. 9/11 happened, which devastated the travel industry because nobody was traveling afterwards. So many people were laid off. Some of my friends were laid off. And the company did like 3 waves of layoffs. And my boss kept supporting me in trying to get them to stay. Well, it finally came time where I was laid off. And they said to me, it's your job performance, but we're going to put on your record that it was part of the layoff because of loss of business. And we are going to give you severance pay. That didn't last long, and I had no money. So I was totally dependent on him. So I went to being an executive, making really good money, to having nothing, because there was no savings. And what I had, I was sending to my ex-wife to care for my daughter. So that is when it got the worst, because he knew he had the upper hand. He was in control. And I think it was the third time that I called the police on him. Anyway, one of the times I called the police on him, they came and I had a bloody nose. And so they took him away and locked him up for 3 days. Well, I had no idea they were going to keep him for 3 days. I didn't know that's how it worked when a domestic case, to kind of give the abused partner time to do whatever they have to do. So that night, I was terrified that he was going to show up maybe the next morning. And so I did what was called tweaker luggage, which is garbage bags. And I filled garbage bags with everything that I had. His sister was a lesbian, and she had a bunch of her friends come out, and they were all standing outside, you know, watching my every move to make sure I wasn't, because he wanted to make sure I wasn't stealing anything. And I had one friend come over, and he's like, he's going to kill me for helping you. He's going to kill me for helping you. And I'm like, well, I got to get out of here. But I kept saying openly to them, so openly to him so that they would hear me say, I want to make sure that we don't take anything that's his. I don't want to have that kind of confrontation. So be very careful what you take and make sure I know what you take. And at that point, I was sleeping on people's couches. and eventually was on the streets. I was on couches until the point that nobody wanted to put up with me anymore. Because I was doing drugs, I was barely able to afford my own food. I certainly wasn't paying them to let me stay with them. And eventually, my personality, because I was just a disaster, they were done. So then I'd have to find somebody else to stay with. And half the time I was selling my ass to have a place to stay. So, there was no money exchanged, but I had a warm bed for the night.
And how long were you homeless?
God, I don't know. It's. I look back and I'm trying to think of how long it was. I can only say it was too long. I slept a lot on the buses, and if I wasn't on the bus, there were two places that I slept. One was on the Santa Monica Pier, and for anybody, I hope nobody needs this information. Bus number 2 is one of the best buses in San Francisco or in Los Angeles, if you need to get rest, because it's one of the longest routes. So you'll sleep for a while before the bus turns around, because whenever it reaches the end of the line, you're required to get off the bus. So I either slept at the Santa Monica Pier, which was the good place. I would sleep on a bench in a location where there weren't a lot of winds near the Ferris wheel. Or I was sleeping on Skid Row, which was dangerous because that was the other end of the line. So it really depended on where I ran out of money to take the bus. And when I would be on Skid Row, I didn't get much sleep because I'd have my duffel bag in the doorway and would be holding it because I didn't want to get stabbed. And that was my life for a while. And I would occasionally have somebody that would have pity and would take me in, but usually it involved sex, whether they stated that up front or not. And this is when I really realized that much of what I thought was my glamorous lifestyle was really because of him. Because I would then go to the Faultline and I would ask the bartender, just give me a beer. And they wouldn't, because they knew I didn't have the money, whereas that would never have been a problem before.
Because he was on staff and he got complimentary drinks.
No, we would never be. It didn't matter whether he was on staff or not. We just didn't pay for drinks a lot. There were two ways we didn't pay. One, the bartenders just gave us our drinks because they liked us there, because we would be the center of attention. Or what we very frequently did was we would take like a little bottle of meth, and in the bathroom we would put it like on top of a towel holder or somewhere where it couldn't be seen. And the bartenders would know where it was. And we didn't just do this Faultline, we did this everywhere. The bartender would know where it was, and they would go, take their little break and have a couple of snorts, and then would come back and give us our drinks. So it was an exchange. It was a barter system. So when I didn't have that to get the drinks, and I didn't have the money, and the people that were his friends before, because everybody I met were his friends to begin with, because I moved to a new city. They weren't antagonistic in any way towards me. They were sympathetic, but I was basically cut off because they were still his friends. I still can't figure out how them knowing what he did physically and mentally, I couldn't stay friends with somebody that did that. So I'm a little hurt by that, but I'm not going to say any of these guys weren't good guys. They were really good guys. And a couple of them did help me out. But they made sure he did not know that I was staying with them under any circumstances, because they knew he'd get angry.
And so what happened? Like, how did you come off drugs? And this is based on the assumption that I think you've come off drugs.
Yes, I've been clean and sober for 20 years.
Well done.
20 years December. And what happened is I started going to the Gay and Lesbian Center. They had it's now called the LGBTQ Center, but it was called the Gay and Lesbian Center back then. And in LA, it's the world's largest Gay and Lesbian Center. It is like it's like a city of its own. Medical facilities, psychological facilities, psychiatric facilities, job placement, library, meeting rooms, a theater. I mean, it's just an amazing place. So they had therapists there, and at that time, I hope it's not true, they started the first same-sex domestic violence therapy program. So I went, and they're like, hey, we got this program. So I started seeing a therapist. And this is the funny thing, because this is something you would never... My therapist and I really hit it off, but I think it was my third or fourth appointment. He sat there, and he talked the entire time. And he was talking about, he had this whole history of dealing and doing drugs. In fact, if you ever watch the movie Goodfellas, he was with those guys. But he was gay. Maybe still, I mean, if he's around, he's still gay, I presume. But I just haven't seen him in years. I lost touch, unfortunately. So anyway, he talked about his background. And I'm like, the whole time I'm like thinking, this is my $1, because you had to pay on a sliding scale. So I only had to pay $1 per visit. And sometimes I didn't have my $1. So after like 3 weeks, they're like, you have to pay your $3 or you can't come back. And I'd have to scrounge for my $3. So anyway, during this meeting, he talked about himself the whole time, and I'm like getting really angry. And finally he said, but after all of that, I now have a home in the Hollywood Hills. I have an incredible partner. I've got this great job. Look at where you are. And then he said something you would never expect a psychiatrist to say. He said, you need to get the fuck out of my office and go to a meeting. And then he pulled out the bus schedule. He pulled out a map. He pulled out the book that showed where AA meetings are. And he said, here's where the next meeting is. Here's how you get there. Go. And I did exactly what he said. And I went to the meeting.
Okay.
I went to the meeting, and it was a woman that spoke Spanish. There was a guy that I knew right in front of me that I'd met at this kind of orgy up in the mountains in L.A., above L.A. But the woman spoke English, but she had such a thick Spanish accent that I couldn't understand anything she was saying. But I was crying because I knew, for whatever reason, I knew was where I was going to be. So
But and so before that, before this psychologist had said to you, you need to go to AA, had you thought about doing it, or was that just something that hadn't occurred to you?
I don't think I ever thought about it.
Uh-huh.
Because I really didn't, it was denial. I didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
I just liked it. And I liked it a lot. I knew I needed help. I didn't think it was getting clean.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I needed help. I mean, literally, I would look at the homeless people that would sleep under the benches, and you could tell they were near death, and I envied them because I'm like, they've given up. I wish I could give up. It would be so much easier.
Oh, wow.
But I couldn't give up because I knew where my life had been before. So I didn't know if I'd have that back, but I knew it could get better. I just didn't know how. And
going to this first AA meeting, from then on, were you just like, yeah, this is the track I'm on now?
Yes, I won't say I slipped a couple times, but for the most part, yeah, I threw myself, I was going to 3 meetings a day. And people were like, 3 meetings a day? Wow. I had nowhere else to go. I would go to a meeting first thing in the morning, and then I would go out and fill out applications, and then I would go to another meeting, and then I'd go back and fill out applications, and then I'd go to another meeting. And hopefully I would have somebody at a meeting that had sympathy and would give me a place to stay.
But had you, because you hadn't hit rock bottom before you ended up going to AA, and you kind of went because someone said you need to go to AA. So had you accepted, or did you accept quite quickly that there was a problem?
Oh, I was rock bottom. I needed somebody to point it out to me. I mean, I was homeless. I had no money. I was walking around West Hollywood with a duffel bag. I had every day. It was so frustrating because I had to find a new place to hide it so I could get out. So yeah, I was rock bottom. I had no money.
I guess what I'm trying to say is you hadn't admitted it to yourself though.
I knew, like I said, I knew I was rock bottom, but I didn't know what to do about it.
Okay.
It took somebody to point to me what to do about it.
How difficult was it?
It was really hard. And I actually had wished I could kill myself, and I couldn't. I kept thinking it would be easier because I would be told at AA meetings all the time, you are such a fighter. You are such a fighter. And I would be like, you're saying that as a compliment, but I'm exhausted. I don't want to be a fighter. I don't want to have to fight all the time. But I did. I was fighting every minute to figure out where was I going to sleep, and how I was going to eat, and how was I going to get money. It was always a fight, and for whatever reason, I stuck with it, and eventually got better.
So what does looking back on that part of your life evoke in your thoughts?
I used to be filled with a lot of shame. I will also tell you I have bipolar disorder. So even after I got sober, my life was spinning out of control and I didn't know why. I just knew something was wrong. And it took years of therapy for me to look back now and say, and I can say this confidently, I did the best with what I had. There's two ways to look at it. One, I did the best with what I had. And I will say this, when I was in the midst of it, I kept telling people, I'm lucky because I have a blank slate and I can choose where I want the rest of my life to go. Most people don't have that, or they don't think they have that. That is one of the things that kept me alive, even though I wouldn't do anything to make it happen. So when I look back now, what I think is, there's no shame. I'm sad it happened, but I actually handled it pretty well, all things considered. And I also, and this is the honest truth, I think about the fact that, at one time I was on a sailboat off the coast of St. John drinking mimosas and eating muffins. And at the same lifetime, I'm sleeping on a bench on the Santa Monica Pier, freezing to death. And how many people can say they've had those experiences? And I think part of that is being a writer. I can look at everything in life as an experience. I can look at other people and say, oh, that's an experience I can learn from. I think that's part of what saves me.
Oh yeah, that is the catch-all, isn't it? Like, it's okay. This will be good for my writing. I'll just do this.
Yeah, I mean...
might be a mess right now, but this is good for my writing. Okay, that's us for yet another week. What do I normally say here? Oh yeah, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to go and find out more about Brad, I would encourage you to do so. He can be found at the Brad Shreve on Instagram, and he also has a number of podcasts that you should go out and listen to, and those are Going Hollywood, Queer We Are, and Queer Writers of Crime. My name is Kay Anderson. Thank you so much for joining Lost Spaces this week to hear Brad's story. If you want to hear more from me, go and follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Lost Spaces Pod. And if not, then let's make it a date and see each other here next week, same time, same place. Yeah? Cool? Okay? All right? Good? Okay? You look pretty today, by the way. Okay, off I go. Bye.